started like any other long haul. Miles of empty highway stretching ahead of me, the faint glow of taillights far in the distance, and the low hum of my rig rumbling beneath me. I'd been a trucker for 15 years, driving through lonely roads where the only companions are late-night radio hosts and the occasional passing vehicle. But that night, something felt off, something I couldn't quite shake. It was about 1 a.m. on Route 89, a stretch of road notorious for being pitch black and barely trafficked. My dispatcher had sent me out to deliver a load of construction materials to a site 2 states over, and I'd agreed without a second thought. The pay was good, and I prided myself on taking jobs no one else wanted. But as the highway stretched endlessly before me, I couldn't help but feel watched. My CB radio crackled faintly, but no voices came through, just static. I fiddled with the dial to clear it up, but the white noise remained, like a faint hiss whispering in my ear. I turned it down and glanced at the empty passenger seat. Nothing unusual. I hadn't picked up a hitchhiker in years. Then I saw it, the figure on the side of the road. First, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. Driving at night messes with your vision after a while, and I'd seen my fair share of weird shadows that turned out to be nothing. But as I got closer, the figure didn't fade away. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. He was tall and thin, standing completely still on the gravel shoulder, just outside the range of my headlights. What struck me was the way he was facing. Most hitchhikers or stranded drivers wave you down or at least make some kind of movement. But this guy, he just stood there, his back to me, head slightly tilted like he was looking at something in the trees beyond the road. I passed him in seconds, and for a moment, I considered pulling over to check if he needed help. Something about the way he was standing, it was so unnatural, almost rigid, like he wasn't entirely sure how to be human. But years on the road had taught me to trust my gut, and my gut screamed at me to keep driving. So I did. The CB radio crackled again, louder this time, a sharp burst of static that made me jump in my seat. "Don't stop!" The words were faint, almost like they were being spoken from another room. I grabbed the mic, ready to respond, but the radio went silent again. I told myself it was interference, some stray frequency from another trucker out there. But a chill ran up my spine that I couldn't shake. 10 miles down the road, I saw him again. I slammed on the brakes, the truck groaning as it came to a screeching halt. My eyes darted to the side mirrors, then the rear view. It was impossible. There he was again, the same tall, thin figure standing on the shoulder of the road. Same stance, same tilt of the head, still facing the trees. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me. My pulse was pounding as I sat there, staring at him through the side mirror. The only sound was the rumble of the engine and my own shaky breath. I hadn't seen another car in miles. It was just me and whatever the hell that thing was. The figure moved, not towards me, not even away. It was more like a twitch, a subtle, jerky shift of his head, as if he was turning to look at me but couldn't quite get it right. My hands tightened on the wheel. I couldn't see his face, but something in my gut told me I didn't want to. "Don't stop!" The voice came again through the CB, louder and clearer this time. It wasn't a warning. It was a command. I hit the gas, the truck lurching forward as I forced myself to keep driving. The figure disappeared into the darkness behind me, swallowed by the night. For the next few miles, I kept my eyes glued to the road, white-knuckling the wheel as I tried to convince myself I hadn't just imagined it all. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe it was stress. But then I saw something in the distance. Pair of headlights. Relief washed over me. Another truck heading my way. I turned on my high beams to signal the driver, hoping to flag them down and maybe shake off the creeping dread that was clawing at my chest. The lights grew closer, brighter. But something was wrong. The headlights weren't moving. As the headlights drew closer, it hit me. They weren't headlights at all. They were too close together, almost eye-like, and they had this strange, pulsing glow, like they were alive. My stomach dropped, and I eased off the gas, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. The glow wasn't coming from a vehicle. It was coming from something standing in the middle of the road. I slowed the truck to a crawl, the beams of my headlights finally illuminating the thing ahead of me. It wasn't human. It stood upright like a man, but its skin, if you could call it that, was mottled and gray with a strange, almost wet sheen. Its eyes were the glowing orbs I'd mistaken for headlights, but they weren't attached to a face. There was no nose, no mouth, just a smooth, featureless surface. It didn't move as my truck rolled closer, but I could feel it watching me, those glowing eyes boring into me like a drill. The CB crackled again. "Don't stop. Keep going." The voice was distorted, like a dozen people speaking in unison, their tones flat and emotionless. My hands were trembling as I tightened my grip on the wheel. I hit the horn, the blaring sound tearing through the night air. The thing didn't flinch. It just stood there, unblinking, as if it were waiting for something. Then it tilted its head, just like the figure I'd seen on the side of the road earlier. That's when I noticed something in the ditch beside me. A second one. This one was crouched low, almost on all fours, its glowing eyes peering up at me from the shadows. The CB crackled again, but this time, the voice was different. A whisper trembling with fear. "You need to run." My heart felt like it was going to explode. The truck idled in the middle of the road, my headlights shining on the creature standing there, unmoving. The second one in the ditch crept closer, its glowing eyes bouncing slightly as it crawled up the embankment. My hands hovered over the gear shift, torn between slamming the truck into reverse or flooring it forward and risking hitting whatever the hell these things were. But then, the one in the road moved. It didn't walk or run. It glided, smooth and soundless, like it wasn't touching the ground at all. The glowing orbs where its eyes should have been grew brighter, and I swear I felt them heating up, like standing too close to an open flame. My instincts screamed at me to go, to get the hell out of there before it got any closer. I slammed the gear into drive and hit the gas, the truck roaring as it surged forward. The thing in the road didn't try to move out of the way. It just stood there, and as my rig barreled toward it, I braced myself for impact. But there was no thud, no resistance. The creature disappeared right as my truck should have hit it, vanishing into thin air. I barely had time to process what had happened when I heard a metallic clang from the roof of the cab. My blood ran cold. Something was on top of the truck. The CB radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't a voice. It was a low, guttural growl, like an animal was pressed up against the speaker, vibrating it with its breath. Then came the sound of scraping, long, deliberate scratches running along the metal roof of the cab. Whatever was up there wasn't in a hurry. It wanted me to know it was there. I swerved the truck hard, hoping to shake it loose, but the weight on the roof stayed steady. The growling sound grew louder, more guttural, and I could hear the faint tap-tap-tap of claws against the steel. And then it came into view. I looked into my side mirror and saw it. A long, pale limb reaching down the side of the cab. Its fingers were impossibly long, each tipped with a sharp, black claw that dug into the metal as it slowly pulled itself further into view. Then I saw its face, or rather, the lack of a face. A smooth, featureless surface with those glowing, pulsing orbs that seemed to stare straight through me. The CB screamed this time, a deafening, distorted roar that sounded like hundreds of voices crying out at once. I gritted my teeth and did the only thing I could think of. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded violently, tires screeching as the full weight of the trailer pushed forward, threatening to jackknife. I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, and for a split second, the world felt like it was moving in slow motion. Then I heard it, the unmistakable thud of whatever was on the roof flying forward. My eyes darted to the windshield, half expecting to see the pale, faceless thing slam into the glass. But it didn't. Instead, I caught a glimpse of it tumbling off the hood and landing hard on the asphalt in front of me. The truck came to a jerking halt, the hiss of the air brakes cutting through the silence. My breathing was ragged, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't dare move, didn't even blink, as I stared out into the darkness ahead. And then it stood up. Its movements were unnatural, almost like it was being yanked upright by invisible strings. The limbs were too long, bending in ways that didn't make sense, and the glow from its eyes pulsed erratically now, like a strobe light flickering just before it burns out. I threw the truck into reverse, my foot slamming down on the gas pedal. The engine roared as the rig lurched backward, but before I could put any real distance between us, the thing did something I'll never forget. It smiled. I don't know how. There was no mouth, no discernible features at all. But I felt it. An overwhelming, suffocating sense of malice that flooded the cab and wrapped itself around me like a cold, wet blanket. The glowing orbs shifted slightly, tilting in a way that conveyed pure, unfiltered hatred. And then it charged. It moved impossibly fast, a blur of pale limbs and glowing light streaking toward me. I didn't think. I threw the truck into drive, slammed on the gas, and aimed straight for it. The impact was jarring, the cab shuddering as the creature slammed into the grill with a sickening crunch. But I didn't stop. I kept going, the weight of the rig bearing down as the thing disappeared under the truck. For a moment it was quiet, just the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of my heart pounding in my chest. Then the CB crackled again. "Keep driving." The voice was faint, barely a whisper, but it was enough to snap me out of my daze. I didn't need to be told twice. I floored it, pushing the truck to its limit as I tore down the highway. Every second felt like an eternity, and I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see those glowing eyes staring back at me. But the road stayed empty. Eventually, the lights of a truck stop appeared on the horizon, and I practically skidded into the parking lot, pulling into the first available space and cutting the engine. My hands were still shaking as I climbed out of the cab, scanning the area for any sign of movement. There was nothing, just the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of other truckers going about their business. I thought about telling someone, anyone, what had happened, but what could I even say? Hey, I ran over some faceless glowing thing on Route 89? They'd think I'd lost it. Hell, maybe I had. But as I stood there, leaning against the side of my truck and trying to steady my breathing, I noticed something. A faint, glowing smear stretched across the grill of the truck. It pulsed once, twice, and then faded, leaving only the faint impression of a smile burned into the metal. I haven't taken Route 89 since, but sometimes late at night when the radio crackles with static or the shadows along the highway seem a little too still, I think about that thing, and I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for the next driver to stop. The truck stop felt safe for a while. I grabbed a cup of coffee from the diner, lit up a cigarette, and tried to shake off the feeling that I wasn't alone. The other truckers were laughing, chatting about weather conditions and traffic jams, completely oblivious to the nightmare I just survived. I kept telling myself it was over. Whatever that thing was, I'd left it back on Route 89. But deep down, I knew better. That faint smile burned into the grill of my rig wasn't just a reminder. It was a warning. I decided to stay at the truck stop for the rest of the night. No way was I going back out on that highway. I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and double-checked that the curtains were drawn tight. My rig felt like a fortress, and for the first time since it all began, I let myself relax. But the moment I closed my eyes, the nightmares started. I was back on the highway, driving endlessly through the dark. The glowing orbs were everywhere, lining the road like mile markers, watching as I drove by. I tried to speed up, to outrun them, but the truck wouldn't move. Then the CB crackled, and that voice, the distorted, multi-layered voice, spoke again. "Why did you stop?" I jolted awake, gasping for air, my hands gripping the steering wheel even though the engine wasn't running. The cab was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. I told myself it was just a dream, but then I heard it, the scraping, long, deliberate scratches running along the side of the trailer. My blood ran cold as I realized the sound wasn't coming from my imagination. It was real. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the switch. The scraping stopped, replaced by the faint sound of footsteps circling the truck. I swung the door open and jumped down, my boots hitting the pavement with a dull thud. The parking lot was bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the overhead lights, but there were plenty of shadows, too many places for something to hide. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No answer. just the faint rustle of wind and the hum of distant engines. I shined the flashlight along the side of the trailer, my heart pounding as I searched for the source of the noise. The scratches were there, deep gouges carved into the metal, as though something with claws had dragged them across the surface. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there, just the empty parking lot stretching out into the night. But I knew I wasn't alone. The growl was closer now, vibrating in my chest like a subwoofer cranked too high. I kept the flashlight steady, the beam darting from shadow to shadow as I backed toward the truck. Whatever was out there, it was playing with me, dragging this out like a predator toying with its prey. Then I saw them, the glowing orbs, dozens of them scattered across the edges of the lot. Some were low to the ground, others hovered higher, like they were suspended in midair. They flickered and pulsed in unison, a hypnotic rhythm that made my stomach churn. My back hit the side of the truck, and I cursed under my breath. I had nowhere to go. The cab was locked, and the keys were still inside. All I had was the flashlight, and it wasn't going to save me. The orbs moved closer, slowly, deliberately, circling me like vultures closing in on a carcass. I could feel the air getting colder, my breath coming out in ragged puffs of steam. And then I saw it. One of the creatures stepped into the light. It was the same as before, pale, long-limbed, and impossibly tall, its faceless head tilting slightly as if it was studying me. The others began to emerge from the shadows, their glowing eyes cutting through the darkness. There were at least 10 of them now, maybe more, and they moved in perfect sync like a pack of wolves. "Stay back," I shouted, raising the flashlight like it was some kind of weapon. My voice echoed through the lot, but the creatures didn't flinch. They just kept coming, their movements slow but purposeful. The growl came again, louder this time, rattling my bones. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, my mind racing for a plan, anything that could get me out of this alive. Then the CB in the truck crackled to life. "Run." The single word jolted me into action. I didn't think, I just ran. I sprinted toward the diner, my boots pounding against the pavement, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps unnervingly quiet for something so large. The glowing orbs were everywhere now, flickering in my peripheral vision, lighting up the lot like some kind of hellish disco. I reached the diner door and yanked it open, slamming it shut behind me. The other truckers turned to look, their conversations falling silent as they took in my wild-eyed panic. "They're out there," I gasped, pointing toward the lot. "There." But when I looked back, the lot was empty. No glowing eyes, no pale figures, just my rig sitting there, silent and still, as if nothing had happened. The truckers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly thinking I'd lost it. One of them, an older guy with a grizzled beard, approached me cautiously. "You okay, son?" he asked. I didn't answer. My eyes were locked on the truck, my mind replaying everything I'd just seen. But then I noticed something. The scratches. They were still there, deep gouges running along the side of the trailer, proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. The old trucker followed my gaze, his expression darkening as he saw the marks. "What the hell did that?" I didn't have an answer. I left the diner at first light, desperate to get as far away from that place as possible. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see those glowing eyes staring back at me. I delivered the load, quit the job the next day, and moved halfway across the country. I haven't driven a truck since, but sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint crackle of static. And every now and then, when the room is dark and the air feels heavy, I catch a glimpse of something glowing just beyond the edge of my vision. I don't know what they were. I don't think I ever will. But one thing's for sure. If you ever find yourself on Route 89, don't stop.